Calvary Cemetery in Dayton, Ohio. April 2023 marks the 111th anniversary of the Titanic sinking. Do you know the story of the Titanic? The RMS Titanic was making its way from England to America when it struck an iceberg on April 14th, 1912, and sank. Took a few hours to sink. The Titanic sank late into the night of April 15th, 1912. If you didn't know, now you know. Thanks for joining me. Let's go find Philip's grave.
On April 14, 1912, a 22-year-old Titanic passenger on his way to Dayton, Ohio, cheated death by leaping into a lifeboat as the sinking ship plunged into icy waters. That person was Philip Zinni, who was very flashy and had a larger-than-life personality. Philip was known in Dayton as Mr. Titanic. Philip was born on October 25, 1886, in Lebanon, which was at the time occupied by Syria. Philip was living in France with his wife Elsie when he decided to see what America had to offer. He was a third-class passenger boarding the Titanic from France and had ticket number 2620. Third-class passengers had rooms on the very bottom of the Titanic. Philip had recounted his Titanic experience in a Niles, Ohio newspaper article dated April 25, 1912. As the story goes, Philip and his traveling companion were asleep when they were awakened by the crash of the Titanic hitting the iceberg. Leaping from their beds, they made it to the top deck. Once there, they were in the midst of great confusion. Philip attempted to leap into a lifeboat but was stopped by an armed officer. He then tried another unsuccessful leap. Moments later, the officer turned away and Philip seized the opportunity by leaping into the lifeboat. There were 3 men and 20 women on the boat. This is speculation that Philip was on the lifeboat with Margaret, quote-unquote, unsinkable Molly Brown. The lifeboat passengers rowed about 2 miles to escape the suction of the sinking ship. 5 hours later, at nearly 5 a.m., the lifeboat saw Carpathia, a ship coming to their rescue. It's believed that Philip had been on lifeboat number 6. Once to shore in America, Philip was taken to the Hebrew Sheltering and Immigration Aid Society, where he was provided with clothing and assistance. Soon after the sinking, Philip brought his wife, Elsie, to Cleveland, Ohio, where their first child, Matilda, was born. She was born April 12, 1913, a year after the Titanic sank. The family came to Dayton, Ohio, where Philip's brothers and sisters lived. He had 3 more children in Dayton: Jeffrey, Francis, and Nazira. Philip was known for having many business adventures. After the tragic accident, he toured around Ohio retelling stories of his time on the Titanic. These tours led him to be known as, quote-unquote, Mr. Titanic. Additionally, he opened a confectionery store with dry goods at Webster and East 1st Street. He also had a pool hall on East 3rd Street near what is now Dayton Metro Library. He also had a show of dancing girls in straw skirts and bright-colored beaded costumes. His daughter, Nazira, who passed away in December 2013, once recalled that she and her sisters would play dress-up in the colorful costumes. Philip died of pneumonia on December 4, 1927. Philip Zinni is buried at the Calvary Cemetery in Dayton, Ohio. His family is still in possession of a suitcase that he used during his travels, which they keep to remember him by. I will now be reading an article from the Dayton Herald in 1912 when Philip was interviewed about his experience on that tragic night. Quote, I was in my bunk in the steerage when one of the fellows with whom I was traveling woke me and said the ship had hit something. The engines were not working right. I could tell that because of the unusual noise from the engine room, and I knew that something was wrong. I had made these trips across the water before, and I was not scared like some of the other passengers who had never been on the ocean much. I partly dressed and went up on the deck, and when one of the steamship's waiters said the vessel had struck an iceberg, The waiter had strapped on the life preservers, and when I saw these, I knew it was something serious. I asked for a life preserver, having left mine down in my bunk. "How much will you give me for a life preserver?" said the waiter to me, and I told him I had left all my money and my gold watch under my pillow and that he would be welcome to it all if he would just hand me a life preserver. I got the life preserver and never went back to the steerage. Then the first boat was lowered, even with the first deck, and I got in. An officer said to me, "Ladies and children first," and I got out of the rowboat and back on deck. When the second boat was lowered, even with the deck, the officers were putting women and children in the boat. I sneaked behind the officer as he was helping a woman in the boat, jumped in the boat myself, and crawled under a seat. Then the boat was lowered. A sailor called out, "Can any of you women help row?" Then I got out from under the seat as we were now down on the water and said, "There is another man in this boat. I'll help you row." I did not know whether the sailor was going to order me to take an oar or throw me overboard, but he seemed glad to have another man to help and told me to row for my life. There were 3 sailors, myself, and 20 women in that boat, the second which was lowered from the Titanic. Some of the women helped us row, and we stayed at the oars for an hour or more. We were a mile away from the Titanic when it sank to the bottom, and the suction was felt by us at that distance. We rowed for a long time toward a light which we thought was another boat, but finally discovered it was only the morning star which we saw. Then we stopped rowing and waited. We were in that boat for 8.5 hours and only saw one other boat during all that time. As we had left the Titanic so soon after the ship had struck the iceberg, we did not see the awful scenes which took place when the big ship finally sank to the bottom. But what we did experience as we were leaving the first deck was terrible. I hope I will never see such sights again, and it is too awful to describe. Finally, we saw a light, and though it was the Olympic, but it proved to be the Carpathia, and we were finally picked up by that vessel, along with the other passengers who had escaped in rowboats. While I was the only man passenger in my boat, besides the sailors, I do know the sailors and women were glad another man was there to help with the oars during that trying time in that little boat." Unquote.
Thank you so much for joining me on this adventure. Please like and subscribe. And remember, here we are everything but interesting.